Hey everyone. Originally I planned on getting this episode out earlier. It was going to be just a kind of bonus episode. I've been trying to produce more content during this whole lockdown thing. But time kind of got by me, and here we are. It's the weekend, so I guess I might as well treat this one like it's the main episode of the week. And so my plan is to just kind of make this a fun, I almost said little, but we know me and my tendency to be long-winded during these unscripted episodes. But a fun episode where I just focus on what kind of entertainment I've been, consuming during this whole lockdown thing. And I guess I better do it now because before you know it, at least here in Massachusetts, the stay-at-home order or lockdown, whatever it is going to be lifted. And I think I'm actually going to have to go back to work on the 18th and start that remodeling job that we were supposed to start before all this happened. And I have mixed feelings about that. If you're a longtime listener, you know that I don't necessarily love my day job. I work construction, for my family's remodeling, general contracting business. And even though I've come to even take pride in certain aspects of the work I do, let's just be honest. It's probably not the work that I was cut out to do. And I'm not saying this to be pretentious because I think it does take smarts to do, carpentry, building, that type of stuff. Because it definitely takes skill and you definitely need, some level of mastery of mathematics, how to competently, work with measurements. Because if you're not precise and your measurements aren't right, the work's not going to be right. And I'll definitely give it to my brother and my father that, I'm impressed by their knowledge of that kind of thing. Because by nature, despite my intellectual pursuits and interests, I've always sucked at math. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that I've kind of always been wired to be, an artist. And when I went back to school for design, it was funny how this one design professor who was also kind of like a mentor to me, he talked about how it was like a common thing that a lot of people who are good at art and who are kind of, imaginative, kind of dreamy types, you know what I mean? That for some reason or another, they tend to struggle with math. So maybe it's just the way I'm wired. But my father and my brother are really good at, figuring out all the precise measurements that go into doing an addition, accurately projecting how much stock we're going to need for a job, being able to sit down and draw up, blueprints or, building plans. So I definitely give it to them there. And like I said, I don't want to sound pretentious, but for lack of a better word, I would say that I'm more the cerebral type in the sense that rather than working with my hands, I'd rather just kind of be living inside my own head, playing armchair philosopher, thinking about things, using my imagination, stuff like that. And that's not trying to take away from my father or brother. I think they're both, really intelligent. And my brother in particular, he's always come across as being very sharp, a very obviously intelligent person. And we actually share a lot of the same interests, despite the fact that we don't really get along all that well. And I think it's a divide that's just kind of widened over the years from, working with family and all the baggage that can come along with that, you know what I mean? And I'm a very kind of sensitive person. And so I've kind of, not just with my brother, but with most of my family, I've kind of erected this kind of emotional wall around myself, you know what I mean? And that's actually funny because I've been hearing that the so-called nostalgia critic actually did a review of Pink Floyd's The Wall. And if I understand it, I haven't watched a review yet, but I think a lot of people think it was a very kind of tone-deaf review. And I think he kind of comes down harshly on Pink Floyd with his criticism of specifically The Wall, the movie. And not just am I a huge Doors fan, I'm also a huge Pink Floyd fan. So I've actually been planning on taking some of this downtime to do a my own kind of review of The Wall in response to his once I watch it, and to just kind of talk about how enthusiastic I am about Pink Floyd. But but yes, in keeping with that theme, I myself have. Kind of erected an emotional wall over time. And when I was younger, I could really easily, communicate with my brother. I was very kind of open hearted when I was younger. But I've always been the type of person that, is tended to take kind of personal slights too seriously, or if someone's kind of in a bad mood and snaps at me, I'm not the type of person that can just, let that roll off my back. I'll hold it in and, I'll kind of hold a grudge against the person. But at the same time, if the person apologizes or whatever, I can drop the grudge in an instant. It's in my nature to be forgiving. It's just also in my nature to be maybe a bit too sensitive too, or whatever, you know what I mean? And speaking of The Wall, that's kind of funny. It just reminded me of an anecdote. It's kind of an odd synchronicity or whatever that kind of ties these two things together. I remember being a little kid, and around the time I was just getting into like rock music and stuff, and my brother and his friends happened to be watching Pink Floyd The Wall. And I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And I actually have a couple of weird anecdotes, like traumatic little anecdotes from my childhood having to do with The Wall. Now, it might be time to get a new office chair anyway. But so I wasn't doing it to be annoying or malicious or whatever. But like little kids are wont to do, I remember I was sitting on the floor, kind of Indian style, leaning forward, watching the TV. The Wall was playing. And my brother and his friends were on the couch, and my brother just snaps at me for being in the way. And I remember one of his friends actually stood up for me. And in retrospect, it was actually pretty mature for this kid, because they were probably just, young teenagers at the time. For this kid to show that level of empathy or integrity, because I remember him saying to my brother, because he really seemed bothered by my brother's treatment of me, and he's like, "Are you blind? He's just a kid," and I still remember that. And there's another time like that I remember, because our parents used to go out to eat like every weekend, where my brother kind of really hurt my feelings or whatever. And back in the day, I studied Shaolin Kempo karate at I don't know if anyone will recognize the name, maybe if you're from the Northeast. It was Fred Villari's Shaolin Kempo karate. I think I got up to like green with a stripe before I ended up quitting. But I was a young kid, probably like late elementary, early middle school, something like that. And my brother had hurt my feelings. And so I go, and my parents are out. And so I go, and this will probably make me look kind of psycho, but I put on my black gi, my black karate uniform, and I like stalked around the house. And I came like face to face with my brother. And he said something else to kind of egg me on. And I think I jumped up on the couch and just leapt at him, like threw all my body weight at him and knocked him down to the floor. And I'm not proud of this, but I think I actually spit on him. Oh, man. And even though I was just a kid, that's still pretty shitty. I actually feel bad about that to this day. But yeah, it was kind of a wild house to grow up in. And so, yeah, here's the other Wall anecdote. I'll try and make it quick. So the brother I was just talking about, that's the brother I still work with to this day. My other brother, and I don't know how much I should divulge. I may have hinted at it in the past. But I have a couple of family members that struggle with serious mental illness. And one of my older brothers, because my brothers are both like somewhere in between 5 to 7 like years older than me. My other older brother, and that might not sound like a lot, but when you're a kid, it's a lot. Because, if I'm like elementary school, early middle school, that puts them, in the teenage years where they're like a lot bigger and more developed than me or whatever. And my other brother, like I said, I don't know if I should be airing this, but wrestles with schizophrenia. And I don't know if it was diagnosed at that time, but a really bad combination. He was into weightlifting, kickboxing, karate, and all this stuff, and was really big and kind of jacked for his age. And at the same time, his mental illness was starting to manifest. You know what I mean? So you had someone that was really very physically intimidating, physically strong, skilled in martial arts, and had like a hair trigger temper and was hard to reason with. You know what I mean? And so around this time, I started hanging around with what people would call kind of a bad element. You know what I mean? So me and some of my little dirtbag friends are kind of hanging out, and yeah. Oh, this is actually, yeah. So we were watching The Wall, me and like my best friend at the time, and my brother, like his. I don't know, he would get kind of triggered easily. Like certain things would make, kind of spark his negative thoughts and kind of put him in a really dark place or whatever. And he would go as far as to try to tell, monitor what other people could, or police what other people could watch or listen to around him. You know what I mean? So obviously Pink Floyd, the album and the movie, is pretty dark, pretty intense, which is, part of what I like about it, And we were watching The Wall, and he came in and like forced us to shut it off and threatened both of us with physical violence. And there was another time when one of my and I say this affectionately, one of my little dirtbag friends, I mean, I was hanging around with kids who had older brothers in juvie, who they themselves may have even had brushes with the law, etc. But they were still in their way, like good kids. And there was one that, he was a really kind of like a fun, friendly kid to hang around with, even though he too could have kind of like a temper or whatever. But he wasn't being a jerk to my brother. He actually just said like, kind of ribbed him in a really friendly, even by me, someone who's sensitive, would, admit it was really just a kind of friendly, kind of like a camaraderie type of thing. And my brother didn't like it. So my brother started physically choking this kid. And I'm trying to pull my brother off. And I'd never seen this kid show fear, but he was afraid. And finally, my brother got off of him, I remember there was another time when, I'm just a little kid. So I was probably, like I said, probably late elementary, early middle school years. My brother was, in his teens, a lot more bigger, stronger, and developed than me. Like I say, he could have been up to like 7 years older than me. And he took the remote control from me and like changed the channel. So I kind of playfully gave him a little slap with a rolled up like TV guide or something like that. And he just started choking me. And I really, like, I don't know what went through my head exactly at the time, but I remember being filled with, like, an animal fear, like, oh, crap, I probably didn't say shit at the time, but, thinking to myself, like, uh-oh, this isn't good, you know what I mean? Feeling like I was really in danger. And the brother who I work with or work for now, he was sitting across from us on another piece of furniture, on the couch or whatever, and he's just looking kind of wide-eyed, like, doesn't know what to do. And finally, somehow, someone got my brother to ease off, or he decided to let me go. But yeah, it was kind of a rough childhood when I think about it, man. All right, so I can't believe I went off on that tangent. And I think what inspired it was I was talking about my kind of strained relationship with my brother at work or whatever. So yeah, come the 18th, it looks like I'm going to be going back. And I think I might have mentioned this half joking on the last episode of the show, that due to the nature of, the construction business, I get paid hourly. You never know how many hours you're going to have in a given week. And so there were weeks where I would make less than what I'm making now via this COVID-19, unemployment program, where regular unemployment is crap. You don't you don't really get much. But that's also supplemented with, 600 from the Fed. And so right now, doing nothing, being out of work, my weekly pay is actually more consistent. And, I'm probably making more than I was while actually working. And so it looks like come the 18th, I'll go back to the status quo where I won't know how many hours I'm going to get in a given week. Could be making less than I was making while at home, and go back to the kind of strained relationship with my brother and all that crap. So, oh boy. 15 minutes in and I haven't even gotten started with my list of things that I've been watching during this lockdown. And before we get started, I just wanted to also add that I probably mentioned it elsewhere that I got a new puppy, and she's a really cute puppy, but I had really forgotten how tough it is to to raise a brand new puppy. Just all that boundless energy, going to the bathroom everywhere, the guilt if you try to crate them. I always give in because I'm a softie. I'll try to crate the dog so she doesn't get in trouble at night, and put herself in danger going some part of the house where she shouldn't be, or trying to chew on wires or something. But I can't she cries like she's being taken apart by a machete. So I let her out. I take her into my bed, and then like last night I woke up with like a turd next to my head. I'm like, oh my God. So I had to take her, put her in the crate while I cleaned the bed, washed all the bedding, and the whole time she's just like, crying and stuff inside the crate. And she's also, puppies have, in the way puppy teeth are worse than adult dog teeth, they have those tiny little razor sharp needle teeth, and they don't know how to use their mouths gently, or they haven't developed their bite inhibition yet, so they're just like, they're either clamping down on your skin or destroying stuff. Next time around, I'm hoping I have this dog for a long, long time. Hopefully, 15 to 20 years. She's a Chihuahua. But next time, I think I might really just adopt a dog that's already like a year or two old, that's already been housebroken and everything. You know what I mean? It really takes it out of you, chasing a puppy around. But I'm still really glad I got her. I'm a dog person. I like having, I love animals. I love having a dog around the house. There's just that initial tough period. But anyway, okay, now we'll get started. So I guess I'll start with The Hunt. And I actually watched this, I think it was a few weeks ago. Who knows, the way the days and weeks just kind of blur together when you're in, this lockdown situation. But I remember being so kind of affected by the movie, or it left such an impression on me, that I almost dedicated an entire, like a brief kind of scripted episode to it. But that just got kind of lost in the shuffle. And you guys who are, regular listeners will know that I love horror movies. I'm kind of a horror movie buff. And I remember when this movie was first about to come out, and then it got pulled. And I remember being kind of pissed because I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding. I'm like, that actually sounds like a really interesting movie. So if you don't remember, it was this really kind of politically charged horror movie. I would describe it as kind of like a horror comedy in a way. And it was a kind of a matter of bad timing. It was scheduled for release around September of 2019. And that was right on the heels of two mass shootings, the Dayton shooting and El Paso. And so, it was interesting. I remember, maybe this is my bias showing through. Maybe I'm remembering things incorrectly. But to me, if I remember correctly, it was mostly people on the right that were kind of worked up about the movie and wanted it pulled, because they thought that it was going to be a movie that celebrated, leftists hunting down and killing righties or pro-Trump people, you know what I mean? And that, for the most part, I think is why it was pulled. And maybe just because in general, it was a violent movie that involved, hunting people down. And we had just experienced a couple of mass shootings not long before that. And I actually like, this is my kind of designer coming through, my inner designer. I'm looking at the poster for it, the theatrical poster, and I really like it. It's kind of nice, nice layout. And they kind of, and I actually think it's pretty clever, but they capitalize on the controversy that was surrounding the film earlier. It says the most talked about movie of the year is one that no one's actually seen, The Hunt. Decide for yourself. And it says September 27th, and that's crossed out. Next to it, it says March 13th. And they incorporate a bunch of maybe it's reviews or public comments people made about the movie. And, it's peppered all over the layout. Demented and evil. Dangerous. Sick. A disturbance to our country. I love it. I love it. And it's funny. So everyone was getting all worked up that it was going to be this anti-right-wing movie. And my takeaway from it is that I think maybe it was kind of a send-up or, a parody or a satire of political bickering or whatever, or division in general. And if it did paint one side more sympathetically than the other, it might actually be the right wing, you know what I mean? Because the bad guys in the movie were actually the elites who were hunting, human beings as sport. And and Hilary Swank, remember her from Boys Don't Cry? She plays one of the lead antagonists. She's kind of this, wealthy young woman who's taking part in the hunt. And it kind of lampoons political correctness, where it has these people who are making sport out of killing other human beings, the quote-unquote deplorables. So you have these people who are so kind of disconnected. They have no problem with killing people who are politically, opposed to them or whatever, or don't share their political views or they view as being under them. But at the same time, they're very delicate about what kind of language they use and to, be mindful about, using politically correct language. So it's funny in that sense. And so it almost paints these elite leftists who are, doing the killing or whatever as, being kind of out of touch and almost, psychotically disconnected or something like that. But at the same time, it does lampoon the right to some degree too. So, the basic premise is all these people who are viewed as being, right wing or whatever are all kind of rounded up. Many of them are just ordinary people from mid-America or whatever, wearing flannel and trucker hats and stuff. And they're all kind of released into this area where they're going to be hunted. And some of these, right-wing people are portrayed as being kind of rough around the edges, kind of uninformed, kind of uncouth, conspiratorially minded, that kind of thing. So in that sense, it lampoons both the right and the left. And yet, and this is, I think maybe the movie, it's kind of an allegory where it's saying that it's people who are on either extreme who are kind of disconnected, and that there are just normal people out there who don't really, feel this kind of blind allegiance to either side of the political aisle and who are just trying to get by. And that brings me to the protagonist. The lead role, it's this actress, I believe her name is Betty Gilpin. I think I almost said Perry Gilpin, but I think that's Roz from Frasier, isn't it? Let me look at this again. I think it's Betty Gilpin. Yeah, Betty Gilpin. And I have to admit, when I first saw her on screen, I'm like, and this is gonna make me sound like a male pig or whatever, but what are you gonna do? I am a straight dude, and I notice the opposite sex. Um, at first, I'm like, I don't really see what the big deal is. Why'd they cast this late? But it's kind of like the more time she's on, the longer she's on screen, the more charismatic she seems to become, and you kind of get why they chose her. And this is neither here nor there, but I found as the movie went on, I kind of found myself being found myself being more kind of physically attracted to her. Am I being a pig? Can I say I found her hot to some degree? But anyway, I also, I really liked her character too. I thought it was an interesting character where she had a military background. She was just a kind of salt of the earth, regular person. She spoke with this kind of tired southern drawl, and she had kind of this quirky, almost overly kind of subdued or quiet personality. And so I think in a way, like, the reason why she was the main character is that she wasn't one of the people on the conspiratorial right, and she wasn't one of the people on the overly politically correct left. She was just a normal American whose prime motivation was staying alive and surviving this this thing she found herself in, the hunt. And so I found her character very sympathetic in that way, and also it's a really quirky character, and I kind of love it. It was like an interesting, different character, the kind of character's personality. So yeah, The Hunt, I thought it was pretty good. I think it's worth checking out. If you like horror movies, if you like movies that are kind of like quirky and irreverent or whatever. Next, I'll move on to, I actually binge watched 2 different Star Trek series during this lockdown or whatever. And usually I'll watch, movies, or I'll watch episodes from a series while I'm working out, especially if I'm on my exercise bike. So I watched both Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery during this, in this lockdown. And just to be honest, try to keep myself as honest as possible, I think I may have started watching Picard before we were technically in in this lockdown. And both series, both Picard and Discovery, have really been kind of panned and poo-pooed. I never say poo-pooed in real life. Why am I using that? Giving myself the douche chills. But anyway, the kind of anti-SJW types, the same type of people who hated Captain Marvel, mostly because of, Brie Larson's comments or whatever. That same type of crowd really bashed, laid it on heavy against, Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. I think Star Trek Picard's been, not Picard, sorry, Star Trek Discovery has been around for a couple of years now. But the reason why I haven't watched or didn't watch Discovery up until this point is because I saw those images that were released of what the Klingons looked like. They totally revamped the Klingons, and really weird. It's almost like they were going for a complete redesign, and they seemed kind of unrepentant about it. When people started really, protesting the decision to change the look of the Klingons, I think the reply was something like, the Klingons, the way the Klingons looked had been changed from the original Star Trek series to, the next generation. And I think one of the movies, Star Trek movies that came in between those series might have had something to do with the evolving look too. And they were saying it was just a similar thing, you know what I mean? And I remember seeing it, and it's like, I didn't like it. It was kind of really weird. And just to let you know where I stand, I like a lot of kind of, and I say this affectionately, like geeky, nerdy stuff, like comic book movies and, sci-fi shows and stuff. I really love a lot of that stuff. But I'm not so devoted to any particular franchise that I can rattle off obscure trivia or minutia, whatever, you know what I mean? But I do enjoy watching all that stuff, and I have a decent, kind of surface knowledge of the lore from these particular franchises. But I've never been to like a convention or anything like that, Not that there's anything wrong with that, to quote Seinfeld. But I was familiar enough with Star Trek, and I think I've watched all the different series with well, I was going to say with the exception of Discovery, but I've watched that now too. And this is kind of, not to make myself look, pervier than I did earlier. I did sincerely enjoy all the different Star Trek series. And I really got into the plots and stuff. Even like, I know a lot of people didn't like Enterprise. I actually liked Enterprise because I was kind of, a fan of Scott Bakula. I used to like Quantum Leap, and I remember him in the Clive Barker movie, Lord of Illusions, was it? But part of my drive, why I would watch certain Star Trek series, because there was usually always at least one super hot female in the the different iterations of Star Trek or whatever. I remember Star Trek Voyager in particular. I used to have like a huge crush on Jerry Ryan. Jerry Ryan, of course, played Seven of Nine, and she wore like this skin tight like glittery cat suit or whatever. And actually, Jerry Ryan, is that the right term, reprises her role as Seven of Nine in Star Trek Picard. She still looks unbelievable. I've always thought Jerry Ryan was just like amazing. And she seems like a genuinely cool person too. I actually, not only did I find her attractive, but I actually, really liked the character Seven of Nine and her portrayal of it too. And then of course, Star Trek Enterprise, we had, is it Jolene Blaylock? I'm not sure if I get the name right, but she played the Vulcan to Paul. Once again, I thought she was like smoking hot, but I also liked the character. So I'm keeping it real. Part of the impetus why I watched these shows, at least in the beginning, was, I was a young guy, hormones pumping, and they always at least had one really attractive girl. But then I'd get really caught up in the show and the the unfolding storyline and everything too. And like I said, I've never been to like a convention, but I guess technically you could call me a Star Trek fan. I mean, I've watched all the series. I know a bit of the lore, and I'm passionate enough, I guess, for lack of a better word, about it, that I don't like seeing the lore or the appearance of certain species or characters, messed with too much. So it kind of bothered me when I saw the kind of revised look of the Klingons. And I know Klingon is a funny word. And what was that old joke like when I was like a little kid? It was like something about Klingons around your anus or something like that. I know, terrible. But now where the hell was I? So yeah, a lot of those anti-SJW type of YouTube creators were really just bashing Star Trek Discovery. And I figured between disliking, the kind of creative direction they seem to be going in, judging by the look of how they revised the Klingons and all that stuff, and it just seemed like everyone was kind of panning it, I decided, why the hell watch it? There's other stuff to watch. But then I had watched Star Trek Picard, and I had liked Picard enough that it kind of left me with a kind of hankering for Star Trek. So I said, what the heck? We'll give Discovery a shot. And if it sucks as bad as everyone says, no one's forcing us to watch it. And why am I suddenly talking about myself, like in the plural sense, like the royal we? It's kind of like Gollum, freaking myself out. But I think there may be this kind of psychological effect at play. I've noticed when a movie or a TV show just gets totally crapped on by everyone, people just repeatedly talk about how absolutely awful it is. It seems like my expectations get lowered so much that things can only go up from there, you know? Since my expectations are down through the floor, I'm almost bound to find something that I actually like about it because I've been told that it's irredeemable, that it's dog shit. So it's like, if there's anything at all that seems, somewhat cool or entertaining, it's like, wow, it's not as bad as everyone said. But yeah, in the case of Star Trek Discovery, I did actually find some stuff I liked about it. And there was some stuff, admittedly, that made me kind of cringe or that, where I could understand why it received so much criticism. On the point about, the Klingons, I don't know if this was in reaction to all the pressure and backlash they got to the kind of redesign, or if this is what they had planned from the get-go. But in the second season of Discovery, the Klingons actually do have their hair back. And just that addition of the hair makes them look much more similar to, the good old Klingons of, Star Trek, The Next Generation days. So there was that. And I don't know if this, once again, if this was just them trying to save face or whatever, but suppose I'd read an article where they said they got the idea for the bald Klingons as we saw them in the first season of Discovery from some kind of Klingon myth about what's the big Klingon hero, almost a messianic type of figure. Is it Kahless or something like that? And about how he had cut off a piece of his hair, something like that. And that's why they all appeared bald in the first season. Don't know if that's true or if that was just cover your own ass type of stuff. But it was nice that in the second season they had hair and looked more like Klingons. And even early on, there's one thing that kind of interested me about Star Trek Discovery, and that's that it starred or stars, isn't it, what's her name? Sonequa Martin Green, the actress who played, is it Sasha? Is that it, on The Walking Dead? And I'm actually a big Walking Dead fan, but I can't believe that show's still on in a sense. It's almost like the show itself has become a limping corpse. I mean, it's not terrible, but I don't know. But I think they're supposed to eventually come out with Walking Dead movies where we get to see what happened to Rick. You know what I mean? Andrew Lincoln? Almost forgot his name. And I think some people were just viewing the series, Star Trek Discovery, through such an anti-SJW filter that they even thought that the character's name. Sonequa Martin Green's character's name was a kind of nod to political correctness or whatever. Because even though she's a female, the character has a male name. I forget man, I can't believe I forgot the last name of the character. But her name's Michael. I just had to look online. Michael Burnham. Yeah, that's it. And who knows? Maybe in the head of one of the writers or whatever, giving the character a male name was some kind of politically correct, motivated by political correctness or whatever. I have no idea. I don't really care. I find that it kind of, for me, it adds to the uniqueness of the character. I like little things like that make a character kind of quirky or more unique. And this might sound counterintuitive, but I think in kind of a weird sense, it adds a bit of realism, because in the real world, we sometimes encounter people who have kind of strange or unique names or whatever, you know what I mean? So that didn't bother me in the least. And there was a character in the first season. I don't know if we'll ever see the character return. I don't know if they have another season planned or not, but in the first season there's a character, I think his name it's like Captain Lorca, and I can remember that, but I can't remember Burnham. But the character is portrayed by the actor, I think his name is Jason Isaacs. I should probably look it up. Jason Isaacs as Gabriel Lorca. Yeah, and that guy is a really good actor. He's actually from Liverpool, England, but he does a really good American accent. And actually, I remember him. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it, but a while back, I don't know how many years ago now, the way time flies, there was a series. I'm trying to think if it was on Showtime. It was called Brotherhood. And I think it was modeled after the relationship between Whitey Bulger and his brother, but it kind of loosely based on that because I think whereas the Bulger brothers were based in Massachusetts, the characters in this show are in Rhode Island. And so still, New England. And actually, I think the guy who plays his brother actually, I don't know if he's Australian or English. Let's see. Jason Clarke plays the brother, and he's originally from Queensland, Australia. Both the guys do really good, like New England accents, very convincing. And so Jason Isaacs plays the kind of the bad brother, the brother that's all wrapped up in organized crime. And Jason Clarke plays the kind of, the son who made good. He's a local politician, I think, who does his best to kind of be ethical, you know what I mean, and not get pulled in to his brother's world. So that was a pretty interesting show. But I was excited to see that guy on Star Trek Discovery because I really like him as an actor. And I wonder if they'll bring him back at some point. And things get really convoluted. And we all know that was the original Star Trek that had the famous kind of the evil counterparts from a parallel universe or whatever. Remember that? Like evil Spock with the goatee. Well, there's something like that in Star Trek Discovery. It turns out that the guy portrayed by Jason Isaacs is actually... and he's not the original captain from our world. He's an evil version from a parallel universe or something like that. And so they kind of, they kill him off. Spoilers. And there was another interesting element to the show. And I remember this was kind of controversial and it was gone after like red meat by detractors of the show. Kind of like sharks to blood in the water. It turns out there was some kind of controversy where the writers for Star Trek Discovery, I don't know if they were officially sued or not, but it was possible that there was legal action being brought against them by a game designer because there was this really kind of weird, unique element to the show where, and I remember this because I've always been fascinated by tardigrades, the so-called water bear. And they're these really cute little microscopic organisms that actually kind of waddle, almost like little bears or something. And they're known for being really hardy and being able to survive in space. So there's this plot point where the crew of the Discovery, I can talk, finds like a giant version of a water bear, like probably like the size of, like a rhinoceros or something. And it's so big that it's powerful enough to like go on a rampage and kill the crew members on this other ship. And then they find out, oh, it's docile. It was just protecting itself or something like that. This is kind of a weird, convoluted plot point. But they discover that they can use the tardigrade to help them travel through time and space to kind of jump from point to point. Almost like, kind of reminds me of like wormhole technology from like, what was it, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. But it's more like there's this weird... like almost like how mushrooms have colonies. There's this weird system. I think they actually call it like a mycelial web or network or something like that. And they use the tardigrade to jump from point to point along the web through time and space. Something like that. And so anyway, there's a game developer who supposedly he had made a game earlier that uses that same, utilizes that same kind of plot point, the use of a tardigrade to jump from point to point in space or something like that. And so, yeah, there was something like that. I don't know how much water the case actually holds or not. But yeah, so there was that whole controversy. And so another weird kind of plot point or subplot that was in Star Trek Discovery, and there's some things I like about this, some things I don't, is that the main character, Michael Burnham, is supposed to be the kind of adopted sister of Spock. And so, my fellow geeks out there who are, familiar with the past iterations of Star Trek, who've watched the various series or movies or whatever, you're probably familiar with Spock's father, Sarek. I think it's Sarek, right? Well, he's a recurring character in Star Trek Discovery. So he's kind of like a father, mentor type of figure to Sonequa, Martin Green's character. And I think I remember hearing people criticize the casting of Sarek, but I actually really liked the actor they chose for Sarek, and I really liked his portrayal. And it's funny, I think I remember the actor from 24, and I think he played this kind of spineless, like duplicitous kind of, like antagonist on 24. Maybe not a main antagonist. I forget now. It's been so long, but kind of like a side character. But I remember hating the guy on 24, and that's probably the sign of a good actor. If you can get people to hate you when they're supposed to hate you, and people to really like you when you're playing what's supposed to be a likable character. I really liked his portrayal as Sarek, and the kind of cool-headed yet caring and paternalistic figure he portrayed. I really liked that. Yeah, so I looked it up. Yeah, the actor's name is James Frain. I think he played Paul Raines on season 4 of 24. And that was back in like 2005 or something. I can't believe how time flies. I remember when like 24 was like the big new show, you know what I mean? And I forget exactly what the character was like, but I remember disliking the character. So even though I kind of like this subplot, I get why, die-hard Trekkies would be upset, because Spock is one of the most beloved characters in the franchise, and they probably don't want to see his backstory being messed with. So all of a sudden we find out Spock had a black sister. Not like race should matter. She's adopted, but it's kind of funny to say it that way. And so Spock does make an appearance later on in the series. Actually, I think it's season 2. He's pretty much kind of a mainstay throughout the series. And I found some of the way they kind of handled Spock's character arc or whatever to be kind of cheesy or bothersome. Basically, Spock is blamed for killing, a bunch of guards or something like that, and he's wanted by the Federation, and he's even though we find out later on there's a reason why he was acting this way, and he's still good old Spock. But, so they paint this picture of Spock as almost like this criminally insane figure who's wanted by the Federation, which is kind of a drastic turn away from the Spock we've known, you know what I mean? So I get why that bothered people. And there was a recurring plot point that I just found cringy. The way this plot element or subplot unfolds, it kind of makes more sense, towards the end when we put all when the show puts the pieces together for us. But there's this reoccurring element of the so-called Red Angel, like the main character, Michael Burnham, she keeps it seems like she's hallucinating or having a religious vision of this this mysterious figure, the Red Angel. And for some reason, whenever any of the characters said the phrase, the Red Angel, it just totally disrupted, my fragile suspension of disbelief, and it made me kind of cringe for some reason. So, I'm trying to keep it real. I'm telling you what I liked and what I didn't like, about the show. And I guess I'll move on to Star Trek Picard. And like a lot of people, I really love Patrick Stewart. And I was really excited when I heard that he was going to be reprising his role as Captain Jean-Luc Picard. And I know I've heard some people criticize when old actors, actors who are now old come back and try to relive the glory days by reprising, a character they played a long time ago, whether it's, Harrison Ford returning to Indiana Jones or as Han Solo or whatever. And some people will say that, it's just too depressing to see how much the actor has aged and, stuff like that. Personally, I've never really felt that way. Well, maybe if the actor is trying to portray the character at an age younger than they actually are, then it might seem a little sad or, just interrupts your suspension of disbelief and depresses you, you know what I mean? But if the actor's age is kind of figured into the script, or into the screenplay or whatever, like, I had a lot of issues, a lot of problems with the last three Star Wars movies. What are we calling it? The sequel trilogy or whatever. I liked Daisy Ridley as Rey, but like many people who like Star Wars, I questioned a lot of decisions they made. The way they handled the character of Luke Skywalker, etc. And I did get around to seeing The Rise of Skywalker. And it's just, I felt really kind of, I don't know, man, strange watching that. I think like a lot of Star Wars fans, I really love the character of the Emperor. And is it Ian McDiarmid who plays the Emperor? I think that guy's, he seems like a great guy. He seems like, he is a great actor. I always loved his portrayal of the Emperor. But I think that trilogy of movies kind of, in a lot of ways, was just a mess because you had different people directing. But you had the guy who directed the middle movie went off into like a weird direction, and then they brought the and I'm forgetting the directors' names. Then they brought back the original director for the third movie to try to save what was left and course correct. What was so. It all seemed like a bit of a mess. And I think if they had kind of telegraphed what they were going to do, bringing the Emperor back, I think it could have worked. But because it seems like the return of the Emperor comes out of nowhere, and it kind of feels just like a desperate last-ditch attempt to course correct and save the franchise, you know what I mean? I felt kind of conflicted or torn by what I thought about the return of the Emperor. It felt kind of convoluted and forced in a lot of ways, but at the same time it was fun to hear and see the Emperor again. It kind of reminded me of there's nothing wrong with imagination. I think imagination is very important. I place a great deal of importance and value on imagination. But I think when imagination isn't wielded artfully and there's not some kind of, focus and effort to tell a linear, coherent story, it can end up seeming amateurish and having this almost immature sandbox kind of feel to it. And as someone who had a shitload of Star Wars figures as a kid and used to like to play at my Star Wars figures in the backyard with my friends or whatever, it kind of reminded me of, how when you're a child, the kind of story that you and your friends are kind of haphazardly weaving together while playing with your action figures, it can be kind of erratic and all over the place. That's what the the story spanning, the three sequel movies kind of felt like to me. Like the way, when you're playing with your action figures as a kid, you're kind of winging it. Like, the Emperor died. No, now he's alive again. Now Chewbacca fell off the Coke can. You know what I mean? It just seemed, there seemed kind of like amateur. If they had set it up the right way, I think it would have made more sense. But anyway, yeah, why was I talking about Star Wars? Oh, yeah, because I was talking about old actors reprising their roles. And Harrison Ford, even in his older years, he's still this kind of suave, charismatic guy. And I have no problem with him coming back as Han Solo. I was actually looking forward to it. And, it kind of makes sense to me that, okay, this story takes place, in the future or, after the events of the older Star Wars movies that we all grew up, loving. So it makes sense that he'd be older now. He has a grown son and everything. So I think that works fine. But yeah, obviously, I know for some reason I know a lot of people actually like Kylo Ren and the portrayal of the character by actor Adam Driver. I just never, I don't know. I just was never really feeling it. I didn't really like Kylo Ren. And so getting to see Han Solo again, but, he's not around that long before he ends up getting a lightsaber in his chest from, a character I don't even really like. That kind of sucked. But similarly, I didn't have any ageist opposition or, to the idea of Patrick Stewart reprising should be the drinking game word of the week, reprising his role as Jean-Luc Picard. I was really looking forward to it. And I think it makes sense. And, I think rightly they try to weave his age into, the storyline, where this is a significantly older Jean-Luc Picard who's elderly now and who's been, away from captaining a starship for some time. And they actually, kind of let you know that, okay, this character is significantly older now. This is a kind of frail, old, elderly man now. And that might sound kind of dark or depressing, and that's kind of a repeat criticism I heard of the show, that both it and Discovery were trying too, hard to be edgy and dark, and they weren't the positive, uplifting, optimistic Star Trek of yore, you know what I mean? And I have mixed feelings in that regard. I think, yeah, I might agree in some little ways that they try too hard to be edgy. For instance, there's a couple of F-bombs in the Picard, and I think actually I think Star Trek Discovery might have had some F-bombs or at least some swearing in it as well. And I'm not some school marm clutching my I just pictured me in drag as an old woman. A school marm is it's usually a woman, right? You guys don't need that image in your head. It's kind of like a Mrs. Doubtfire, Mrs. Doubtfire vibe. But I wasn't clutching at my pearls. I'm not wearing. Once again, I'm gender bending, but I mean. I'm not a prude. It doesn't bother me that they would swear. The only reason why it would bother me that they would swear is that I've never seen that in Star Trek shows before, so it might kind of threaten my suspension of disbelief. You know what I mean? And yeah, so there was something that almost seemed like clumsy shock value when they had characters dropping F-bombs in Picard. But as far as, accusations that the shows had taken too dark a turn or whatever, when I think about it, there were definitely dark plot lines or whatever elements in past iterations and past Star Trek series. Like, I would say one of the most successful or, kind of universally beloved plot lines in all of Star Trek is the Borg. I know the Borg were always one of my favorite things, about Star Trek. And that's pretty damn dark. Like a bunch of they almost looked like Cenobites from Hellraiser. Like this kind of dark race of cold cybernetic beings assimilating life and turning it into, a part of their own, whatever it is, their own technological nightmare or whatever. Like, that was pretty dark. And even if you look at Deep Space Nine, that Deep Space Nine was pretty dark at times. It dealt with like war crimes, and there was definitely like Nazi parallels where there was like the I was gonna I was gonna say Cardassian. I almost said Kardashian. There's a race in Deep Space Nine called the Cardassians, and they're like Cardassian war criminals. And there's the one particular dude who is now after the war was working as like a tailor or something like that. That definitely had like a kind of boys from Brazil kind of Nazis hiding out in South America kind of feel to it. So Star Trek has definitely been dark in the past. But in fairness, I know a hallmark theme with Star Trek is that kind of, that optimism that someday we will reach this kind of utopia. You know what I mean? And I always loved that about Star Trek, that uplifting message that someday together as a species, we can move to this place where we're a force for good, where we're enlightened, where we move beyond our barbarism and selfishness. You know what I mean? I always liked that. And I think even as a kid, before I identified as an atheist or non-believer or whatever, there was something that appealed to me too, that the value that's placed on reason, where Star Trek really did paint this kind of portrait of a secular humanist utopia where people really valued reason, and people fully embraced science and what science can do for us and where it can take us. But at the same time, it was a very moral society. Very ethical society. So I just thought that was awesome. Even as a kid, that appealed to me. Now I'm trying to think if there's anything I didn't like about Picard. I know there's one thing that stuck out like a sore thumb to me, and I think a lot of other people picked up on too. It was really bad, man. It was just like so bad. There's this one episode where there was this plot line that Picard and his new crew had to kind of disguise themselves and act as spies and went into, I don't know, some hive of scum and villainy, to quote Obi-Wan Kenobi. I know that's a different franchise, but they went into some kind of seedy underground place and they had to disguise themselves. And so you have this elderly Patrick Stewart wearing this really bad disguise, man. It was like he's wearing a beret and an eye patch and talking in this really over-the-top French accent. And it was like as much as I love Patrick Stewart, it was like major league douche chills. I was like, holy shit. That was like the worst thing for me, that moment. And I think maybe if they had handled it differently, like more in a self-aware kind of fashion, as if they were in on the joke, maybe it would have worked. But even then, I feel like no matter how you slice it, it was just like a really odd moment. Even if it was meant as a self-aware joke, it would be at the detriment of the plot, because Jean-Luc Picard is supposed to be a very kind of intelligent, resourceful military man who's good at making plans, even as an older figure. And I mean, they paint him as being elderly, but they don't paint him as being, a nutter who's, been struck with dementia or something. He's still in control of his faculties. So I think even if he's physically not the man he used to be, he he still has enough Jean-Luc Picard about him that he wouldn't do something stupid and ridiculous, like, marching into a tavern with a with a cheap, like, Frenchman disguise or something. Just it didn't make any sense. And I think it was in that same episode, but there was something else that I kind of took issue with, that they had a great opportunity to do something, but they didn't utilize it in the story. There was an actress in that episode. I think she was like some kind of bad guy, but she looked so strikingly similar to the actress Marina Sirtis, who, I think that's her name, who played Counselor Deanna Troi in Star Trek The Next Generation. Am I nerding out enough for you guys? That, I was really confused when I saw this actress, because I didn't know if it was supposed to be, like, maybe it was Marina Sirtis with, I don't know, they made her look a little younger for some reason, or if it was supposed to be her daughter or something like that. This actress looks so much like Marina Sirtis that they should have used that in the script. They should have made her like a daughter or a relative or something. It was pretty crazy. It just seemed like a lost opportunity. And there was something else I took issue with. I absolutely loved Jerry Ryan. I thought it was awesome that she returned as Seven of Nine. But one thing that bothered me as a, Jerry Ryan fan, Seven of Nine fan of the whole, Borg thing, that there's this moment that could have been awesome. They had in case you don't know what the Borg are, like I was kind of, alluding to earlier, in Star Trek, and this really is dark, because that's part of what I like about it, there's this quote-unquote race, I guess we'll call them, called the Borg. And it's really like this it's represented by, or their ship is, like, literally just a big giant cube in space. But it looks like it's made out of all little bits of technology and metal and stuff. And living in this cube is a race called the Borg. Like I said, they almost look like the Cenobites from Hellraiser. And they're beings, kind of snatched away, abducted from all different races across the galaxy or whatever. And they're turned into these cold, cybernetic things, these kind of fusions of man and machine in the worst way possible. They're organic to some degree, but they've lost their humanity, you know what I mean? And they just kind of go around almost like sharks or something. They're just cold and move, from place to place or whatever, looking for prey or whatever it is, looking for more people to assimilate into the Borg collective. And that's not what sharks do. I just meant they're kind of like these cold machines, kind of like we view sharks, And they were just like a great, I'll put villain in quotes, because more than being a villain, they were just like, they weren't a force of nature because they were technological, at least in part, but that they weren't bad, they weren't good, they were just the Borg. And they existed just to keep assimilating more organic life into the Borg collective. And just awesome stuff. And so Seven of Nine, Jerry Ryan's character, here I really am nerding out, and this happens in Star Trek Voyager. They actually managed to rescue a member of the Borg. So the Borg enter on, Voyager. The Borg kind of infiltrate or invade the starship Voyager or whatever it is, and they managed to capture the Borg, whose designation is Seven of Nine. We find out she's really a little girl who was assimilated by the Borg, and I think it was her real name. It was like Anna. I was saying I didn't know all this trivia about Star Trek or whatever, but I believe her name was Annika, something like that, or human name. And so they remove as much as they can, the Borg technology from her, but some little implants are left. And she has a great story arc or character arc where she slowly, struggles to regain her humanity. So this character returns in Star Trek Picard. She's kind of a little bit more rebel. Instead of wearing a uniform, she's wearing like, a beat up leather jacket and boots and stuff, and has a little more attitude. And there's a moment where, despite her inner demons, despite, everything she suffered at the hands of the Borg, she decides, for the sake of everyone, she's going to enter on a Borg vessel. And so not only does she, enter a Borg vessel or cube where she's confronted by, reminders of her past, but she also decides, for the sake of everyone, to take over the cube. Because here, I'm really getting nerdy. There's Romulans. And I don't want to go into the whole backstory about Romulans, but there's Romulans who are in control of the cube. In order to save her friends or whatever, to, save the day, she decides to take the place of the Borg queen. And it was almost like, an insect hive where the queen controlled all the drones or whatever. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is going to kick ass. 7 of 9 is actually going to, take over the role of the Borg queen. And we're going to see this character we love who has this, conflicted history with the Borg, actually in full control of a Borg cube. I'm like, it's going to be crazy to see this character and this, depicted as being this powerful or whatever. And then she steps into the role of the Borg queen, and that lasts for what feels like a couple of seconds. And then her plan is thwarted, and she's back to being the new, edgier 7 of 9 or whatever. It was just like, I'm like, really? They're going to build up to that? They're going to take this character that so many people love, and, it's this great kind of moment that they were building up to. We're going to see 7 of 9 as a Borg queen. And then, that didn't last too long. I'm like, really, man? That's so disappointing. Hey, everyone. So I'm back, and you might be asking, where'd you go? Well, it was getting pretty late last night, and I wanted to make sure that my brain was good and sharp as I proceed to, tackle the rest of this list. And so, through the magic of editing, here I am the next day. And so it's kind of embarrassing to admit, but I did binge watch cartoons during this lockdown. It reminds me of how my brother, the one I work with, every now and again he'll kind of joke about, people living off of welfare or on unemployment, staying home and watching cartoons. And that's pretty much what I've been doing. I'm temporarily on unemployment and I'm home watching cartoons. Yeah, it's probably safe to say that my brother leans a little more right than I do. But anyway, so the 2 cartoon series that I watched, in fairness, they're animated series that are kind of geared towards adults. I watched the Netflix Castlevania series, and I watched a cartoon series called Devilman Crybaby. And I think it was actually Vegan Gaines who recommended Devilman Crybaby during one of his live streams. But I'll actually start with Castlevania. And there were some similarities between the two. I noticed both of them had really graphic violence, and they had these awesome kind of profane demons, just these, blasphemous abominations. That it was really cool, the kind of monster designs. And both of them kind of blended kind of sex and horror, which I actually like and find fascinating. I mean, don't worry, I'm not into like whips and chains in my personal life, but just, in fiction or whatever, I've always found that fascinating, that kind of marriage of horror and erotica. And that reminds me of like Clive Barker and the Hellraiser series, and even the work of David Cronenberg. He's made some great ones. David Cronenberg did he do Videodrome? But he did Shivers, Rabid, just these movies that kind of combine body horror and eroticism. There's just something about that I've always been drawn to in fiction and fantasy. Yeah, and he also did a movie I really liked called Crash. It's like I think it's become kind of a cult classic, you know? And I was pissed when that movie that became really more popular. There was another movie called Crash that I think didn't like deal with race relations and or something like that. Um, and I was pissed when that movie came out because whenever I wanted to recommend the Cronenberg movie Crash, people would always think I was talking about that one. But the David Cronenberg movie Crash is really warped. It's about this like group of kind of perverts or misfits who have a fetish regarding like car crashes. Like they'll actually they'll intentionally get into car accidents and stuff like that because that's what turns them on. So they'll crash cars and then have sex. And I remember Roseanne, is it Roseanne or Rosanna Arquette, Patricia's sister, is in that movie. And it's strange, like it makes me ask like what kind of person am I, because I actually find her character really sexy. And she yeah, so she's this character who also has this kind of car crash fetish, and she's been in like so many crashes or whatever that one of her legs is messed up and she has to wear like this metal brace with pins through it and kind of limps around, but she's really sexy. And there's a scene where I think it's is it James Spader? I think that's his name. Where and it's weird because I think James Spader's character is kind of more clean cut, but he falls in with these kind of misfits who have this car crash fetish. And there's a scene where he's with Rosanna Arquette in a car, and they start like making out or fooling around, and he's like feeling her leg up, and he like puts his fingers into like her big scar, and it's really it's messed up. And I think, not to spoil it, but I think the movie pretty much ends with James Spader and his love interest. This isn't Rosanna Arquette; it's a different actress. They go over a guardrail on the highway or something, or down in a ditch, and you see like the cars like all messed up and smoking or whatever. Then they're in the grass like a bit away, and they're like making out or whatever. It was a pretty wild movie. Yeah, there's a lot of David Cronenberg films that I've really liked. I think did he do maybe he just made like maybe he just had a cameo. I know Clive Barker's Nightbreed. He played the kind of bad guy in that. He played like this kind of evil psychiatrist character or something. I don't know if he directed it or if that was just a cameo. But then he did. There was a movie Existenz, which it wasn't his best movie, but I liked it, and I know a lot of people panned that. And then I'm a big fan of so-called beat literature like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs. And I think it was Cronenberg who directed the film adaptation of Burroughs' Naked Lunch, I think. And that was a really warped movie too. But one more thing about that movie, Crash, it was really warped, which is what I like about it. But there was one scene that kind of like disturbed me. It's funny. There's a scene where one of the characters, I forget if it's intentional or unintentionally, they get into a big crash, like a pileup on the highway. And there's this character who I think is a mechanic, and he's always wearing kind of like, like one-piece mechanic coveralls or whatever you call that kind of uniform. And he really reminds me of Christopher Maloney, is that his name? The actor from Law and Order Special Victims Unit. And he arrives at the crash scene, and he's just totally enwrapped by what he sees, and he's taking pictures with kind of like an old school camera or whatever it is. And he's just commenting to himself about how impressed he is with the details of the crash. and you see like a dead couple or something, and you also see their dead dog. It's a little black and white dog that really looks like the first Chihuahua I had, Picasso. And I'm like, oh no, don't go. Because, like I've said before, don't know what it says about me, but I can watch people get killed and taken apart left and right in movies, and it doesn't really bother me. But like anything happening to an animal, and I'm like, oh, it makes me squirm in discomfort. You know what I mean? Yeah, anything happened to an animal, and especially a dog, and scenes of depicting sexual assault. Those are like the two things that really kind of make me recoil or feel uncomfortable. Anything else though, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, someone going around hacking up people, it doesn't really get to me. But those are the things. So I'm kind of laughing about it because I know a real animal probably wasn't hurt to make the movie, and it wasn't my dog. It just reminded me of him. But yeah, just something about that little dead, black and white dog that bothered me. And the guy snapping a photo of it, and he says something like, "Oh, the dog is absolute genius," or something like that. It's messed up. But it's funny. I have a female friend who's, pretty tough chick. She can come across as being, come off as being kind of like jaded, we both like horror movies. I remember we were talking about a particular movie, and I was telling her about how like the rape scene in this movie really bothered me, and she kind of shrugged and she was like, "It's probably supposed to." And I'm like, good point. You know what I mean? But that being said, I think there are some movies that kind of, it seems like they intentionally kind of try to eroticize, sexual assault scenes. Like they'll close up on certain parts of the anatomy and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty messed up. But if there's a movie where like a scene of sexual assault is integral to the plot or something like that, and they handle, the material responsibly, yeah, I can get that. And it's probably, my friend's right. That's probably the reaction that they're looking for. If you're a decent human being, you're supposed to kind of recoil from, that situation that's being depicted. But anyway, yeah, so where was I? Oh yeah, Castlevania. So I remember when I was a kid, I really liked the original Castlevania game. It was just a simple, what do they call it, like a side-scrolling platform game or whatever. Very kind of simple, old-school graphics. And then it's funny, when I got a little older and got back into gaming again, because there was a period where I got into like my late teens, and for some reason, I just like convinced myself that I was too old to be playing video games. And then later in my 20s, I started, experiencing like a feeling of nostalgia and remembering the games I used to play as a kid. And so I installed some like game emulators on my computer and played a bunch of like old school games. I think there was even like a Game Boy emulator, which had a few different Castlevania games that I really liked on it. And then that led me into just because I don't know if I describe myself as a gamer, where it's not like I play video games every day or something like that. But that led me to get back into like console gaming and even PC gaming. But yeah, I felt like, I don't know, like Castlevania, they're just these little fun side-scrolling games, and so a person might be skeptical. Even the names, I like it, but it's a little hokey. How are you going to take something called Castlevania based off of like a simple video game and turn it into something compelling for an adult to watch, But they did it. So, yeah, definitely. It's definitely a series that's not for kids, at least not really young kids or whatever. I'd say maybe I'd say maybe it's like R rated, I guess, or something like that. I don't know what the official rating is, but just personally, judging by the content, I would probably give it an R rating. A lot of really gruesome violence, a liberal amount of strong language. I think even F-bombs. There might be F-bombs in it. They say shit a lot, I think. Uh, and sex scenes, too. There's even a bisexual, sex scene with a three. There's this kind of androgynous, but definitely male vampire character, and this young kind of brother and sister seduce him, and they have this. They don't show pee-pees and wee-wees, but you can tell what's being suggested, and it's it's a really graphic sex scene, where even like the male character is swinging like the other male character's legs over his shoulders and stuff. So pretty hardcore, pretty graphic for a cartoon, and definitely meant for an adult audience. And even though I'm a skeptic, you guys know that I'm really interested in the occult, kind of fascinated by it and stuff. And so there's a lot of cool kind of occult references in it. There was even a Saint Germain character in it. And I always wanted to do like a little documentary episode about Saint Germain, and I might actually do that someday. So a lot of cool stuff like that. And once again, I thought the demons were awesome. Just these really kind of nightmarish kind of, Chimera-esque kind, fusions of different animals to create like a nightmarish demon appear. Just like hard to describe, but in that way, like is definitely similar to Devilman Crybaby. I just love the nightmarish design of the demons. And so I guess I'll move on to Devilman Crybaby, which might sound like an absolutely ridiculous title. And in part, it has to do because Devilman is a Japanese series, and we all know how kind of entertainingly bad, Japanese to English translations can be, And this is going to lead me into talking about something that I feel like it's actually something that's kind of like a deep part of me, shaped during my childhood, that I always kind of wanted to mention on the show, but there was never really a place for it, but maybe I touched on it in passing. Yeah, it was really interesting hearing Vegan Gaines, who's a relatively young guy, talk about, a spin-off from the Devilman franchise, because the creator of Devilman, I believe his name is Go Nagai. Hopefully I'm not butchering that. But he's really contributed a lot, not to just Japanese kind of pop culture, but kind of global pop culture too. And the work of Go Nagai goes all the way back to the 70s. So I was just a little kid back I'm a Gen Xer. I was born in the 70s. So I was just a little kid. And then maybe it was like in the early 80s, there was a cartoon series that I really liked. And it was actually a little before my time, but it was more like probably something that was, my older brothers, part of their generation or something, but they were still showing reruns when I was a kid. And those of you who also hail from the Northeast and are Gen Xers around my age, you might remember this TV series. A lot of us loved it as kids, probably most of us, boys. It was a show, I guess, I wouldn't say created, but kind of like marketed for American consumption by this guy named Jim Terry. He took a bunch of Japanese super robot shows, cartoons, that had been really big, in Japan, and kind of repackaged them for an American audience. And so he started this show called Force 5. And it would air, I believe, Monday through Friday. And this is why it was called Force 5, because each day would be an episode of a different super robot show. And so you had these Japanese super robot shows that ended up, the characters portrayed ended up becoming household names, among American kids. And So you had like, I don't know. I feel a little self conscious because I don't know if any of you out there will even know what the hell I'm talking about or if you'll recognize any of the names. But a lot of the characters and the robots were renamed because they thought maybe, my guess is they thought the original Japanese names might not go over as well or translate as well to an English speaking audience. So when I was a kid, I absolutely loved those super robot cartoons. And then once again, like there were toys that were spawned from these shows, and the toys were more like they were a little before my time, and they were more like a part of my older brother's generation. But you could still get them when I was a kid, but you had to hunt around for them because they weren't being made anymore. And so, like, there was a place in my area. It was in Waltham, Mass, and it was on Moody Street, and I think it was called Mr. Big's Toyland or something like that. And they had these toys, of the different robots that were in the cartoons I loved, and they were so well made. Like, when you look at kids' toys today, they're all made out of cheap plastic. Back then, at least these particular toys, these robot toys from Japan, there was actually probably more metal in them than plastic. They were made out of die-cast metal with some plastic stuff, like they shot like plastic missiles. Maybe the hands and the heads were plastic, but they had a lot of die-cast in them. So they had a nice kind of quality, kind of metallic look to them, and they had a lot of heft because of the weight of the metal in your hand. Just awesome toys. And I remember that I don't know if it's a cultural difference or what. I think it might have been because of lawsuits that these toys shot projectiles and did a pretty good job of it too, to the point where if they got you in the eye or something, they could injure you. So there was some kind of law passed where they could still sell those toys, but they had to be altered. So like they deactivated the springs or whatever before they sold them. Yeah, and so over here in the States, these robot toys were marketed as Shogun Warriors with this kind of like faux, kind of karate-esque Asian typeface or font, you know what I mean? And they were sold over here by Mattel. But they were actually these Japanese toys that, were spin-offs of these popular Japanese cartoons. And I think in Japan, they were sold under like the Popey or Poppy Bandai label. And so a lot of these robot characters were actually designed by this guy, Go Nagai. And I didn't realize how prolific he was until, out of a sense of nostalgia, I started reading up on these shows. And a lot of these robot cartoons were based, as manga, the right or manga pronunciation, were based on Japanese comic book series, created by Go Nagai. And it's funny because I always thought of these robots as kind of an innocent part of my childhood. The only thing, I mean, yeah, maybe they were a little violent, but, just the cartoon of violence of robots beating the crap out of each other. But other than that, pretty seemingly innocent, kid-friendly stuff, But it's funny, I didn't find all this out till recently. But Go Nagai was actually, his work was viewed as being somewhat controversial because the manga books that these cartoons were based on, turns out the cartoons were really kind of watered down for a younger audience, and he's known for all the sex and violence in his comic books or whatever. And I'm talking like really graphic stuff. Even these robot cartoons, the manga have like liberal amounts of nudity and sex and just really like crazy violence. Like just for the heck of it, I went, online and looked at some of the original books or whatever, and digital copies of them. And I think there was an episode or a part where one of the villains was piloting a giant robot and had naked ladies in like glass bubbles all over, the robot he was piloting to deter the hero from attacking him. And it was something, and it ended up with like some of the naked women dying, heads coming off, and just like crazy shit. And there was another one where one of my favorite robots. There was this robot. His Japanese name is Grandizer. He was known over here in the States as Grandizer. And it was this really kind of, other than the robot on robot violence, really kind of wholesome kid show, I mean? But in the books that's based on, there was like a similar kind of scene where the Grandizer robot is being piloted by the good guy, and he's fighting another robot, and there's like live children tied all around the robot so he can't, hurt the bad guy's robot or whatever to deter him from attacking. And it still ends up somehow with like giant robot hands smushing kids like bugs and stuff. And there's even like parts that like kind of like graphics, like picturing like the sexual daydreams or fantasies of the characters, and just really like graphic like nudity and sex and stuff. Really wacky. And so I wanted to make sure it wasn't just some weird fever dream. And I actually just went back and slogged through page after digital page of the Grandizer manga. And yes, actually, the good guy robot, Great Mazinger, is stolen. I know it sounds ridiculous. Is stolen by a bad guy. And then they use Great Mazinger to fight Grandizer. And Great Mazinger has children and people the pilot of Grandizer loves tied all over him. And so Mazinger is punching Grandizer, and little kids are getting smushed and there's blood smeared all over Grandizer. I'll include pictures. I took some screenshots in the YouTube version. And since I'm already mentioning Mazinger, it's funny. Probably, I would say arguably Go Nagai's most famous creation is the super robot Mazinger. And I think Go Nagai was inspired by earlier robots, but I think it's thought that Mazinger, or Mazinger Z as it's called, is kind of like the super robot granddaddy, the one that sparked, the whole kind of super robot craze. And I think the word or name Mazinger in Japanese, it might be something like a portmanteau or contraction of the words God and demon or devil. So it means something like devil god or god devil or something like that. And I'm actually reading here. It says that Go Nagai used the name Mazinger Z to evoke the image of a demon god. Ma meaning demon and Jin meaning god. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And the funny thing is, there was a follow-up to Mazinger Z, and Go Nagai, created a new character called Great Mazinger that was supposed to be like a step up from Mazinger Z. And it's funny, the Shogun Warrior toys, they sold one in the line that was based on Mazinger Z. And it's funny because it almost sounds like they're saying it, you're saying it with a New England accent. They changed the character's name from Great Mazinger to Great Mazinga, which, yeah, sounds like you're saying Mazinger with a New England accent, which worked pretty well here in the Northeast. Great Mazinga. So that was funny. And so then I saw a cartoon that a while after Force 5, another super robot cartoon came to America, and it was called Tranzor Z, and you guys might remember that. And I remember watching it and thinking, oh, this robot looks like a ripoff of Great Mazinga. Oh, and they don't even, that's not right or whatever. whatever was going through my little kid noggin. And it turns out, no, Transor Z was actually a repackaging of the original Mazinger Z cartoon from Japan. And it actually, that cartoon predates the Great Mazinga character that I saw, sold as a Shogun Warrior toy. And so, yeah, Transor Z, which was very popular when I was a kid, that was actually based on on Mazinger Z. And then everyone probably know Voltron became like a household name, you know what I mean? And if you're a Gen Xer, you probably remember Voltron. And Voltron, same thing. It was a repackaging of a Japanese cartoon. And I believe the Japanese character was called Go. I don't know how it was pronounced, but it was literally the two words together of Go Lion. It was Go Lion or Goleon, something like that. And so, and I remember being at a flea market. I think it was like Big Jim's something flea market. It was a really popular flea market in New England. And there was actually a booth where they were selling these die-cast metal robot toys, still in like the Japanese packaging and everything. And they just looked so awesome. And they had a big one. Voltron had just come out, but there weren't any Voltron toys yet, I'm pretty sure. And so here I am, a little kid with my mother at a flea market, and I see this colorful box up on a shelf. Big box with a big robot inside, a die-cast metal Voltron. And I probably wasn't thinking these words because I was a little kid, but I think my sentiment would have been something, equal to holy shit. You know what I mean? I was like, because I loved Voltron. All of a sudden, there's a huge die-cast metal Voltron. Still in a box with like all the Japanese writing, so it was probably called Go Lion or something like that. And I remember begging my mother for it, and she was getting pissed off at me, but she eventually relented and got it. And that was always uncomfortable as a kid, because you could feel the tension in the air. It was thick enough to cut with a knife. That on the one hand, you got the toy you wanted, but you had to deal with the awful feeling that your mother was red hot pissed at you for making her spend money on you. So yeah, there's that. So anyway, to come full circle, so Go Nagai also had a series called Devilman. And it's funny, I'm a Rob Zombie / White Zombie fan. And I'm trying to think, is the name of the song Devilman? I have to look it up. Yeah, it's funny. It's one of those situations where I know the lyrics and can hear the song in my head, but I wasn't sure of the what the official title was. Yeah, it is called Devilman. And I saw Rob Zombie in an interview actually saying that it was inspired by the comic book / anime Devilman. I love the lyrics to this song. Jesus lived his life in a cheap hotel on the edge of Route 66, yeah. He lived a dark and twisted life, and he came right back just to do it again. I like, a little further down, hellhounds leap at the cowardly kings and carry souls across the river Styx, yeah. They see no evil and feel no pain, sucking juice from a fallen angel. I dreamed I was a supernova fucker nitro burning in fuel injection. Feed the gods a strychnine soul, a motherfucker of invention. Just great fucking stuff, man. I love those lyrics. There's something in general that I've always really loved about Rob Zombie's lyrical style. It's like, it's colorful and fun, but dark and twisted, and sometimes it almost seems like borderline psychotic, and that's meant as a compliment. And maybe as like not to sound pretentious, but as like a lyricist myself, someone who sings in a band and writes lyrics, I can understand where it's coming from. I think there's a place in your head where you can almost kind of willfully induce a kind of an almost temporary state of insanity where you just let the floodgates open and let your mind play, and you just let the craziest shit come out, and maybe in a way, and maybe this sounds kind of pretentious too, but I imagine it's almost something similar to what a shamanic trance might be like, this kind of controlled psychosis or something, where I'd let the music kind of flow through me, kind of take me over, and it would guide me somewhere emotionally or kind of guide me into a certain headspace. And on the fly, I would just kind of try to come up with a melody or vocal rhythm that fit the music. And also, just on the fly, try to come up with lyrics that mirrored where I was in my head or what I was feeling, and also mirrored the spirit of the particular piece of music that I was letting control me or guide me. And this is, admittedly, this is probably just me romanticizing things, but I used to like to think that maybe, I come from a family where there's people wrestle with serious mental illness. I like to think that maybe, fortunately for me, I didn't inherit that. As I like to darkly joke, I just inherited, depression and neuroses and anxiety or whatever. You know what I mean? I got kind of lucky in that way. It could have been worse. But I like to think maybe there's something in me that kind of, although, I like to think I'm a rational being, you know what I mean? I value critical thought and reason. And maybe, who knows, maybe one of the reasons why I value, reason and being in control of your own faculties and using, employing critical thinking so much is kind of a response to where I come from as a person. I don't want to, I'm kind of afraid of succumbing to mental illness because I come from a family where there's mental illness. But I think if I was going to become schizophrenic, that would have happened a long time ago. It usually emerges, I think, in late teen years, early 20s or something like that. But I'd like to kind of romanticize that maybe even though I don't have full-blown psychosis or whatever, maybe there's something in me because of my background that allows me to kind of, turn a valve and allow myself to willfully play with madness, to quote Iron Maiden. You know what I mean? And that luckily I'm not psychotic, but maybe there's something in me that understands or can flirt with that kind of mindset and utilize it creatively. But that's probably, like I said, once again, just me romanticizing things. And maybe that's doing a disservice to people who wrestle with mental illness. Because I think the kind of quote unquote madness that an artist of otherwise sound mind, engages in, in the realm of imagination, it probably has a different quality than the kind of disjointed thinking or whatever that a person with severe mental illness experiences. I remember I have a book around here somewhere that I read a long time ago called Creativity and Madness. And I think it delves into the difference between normal creativity and the kind of creativity you see expressed by people with severe mental illness, and how you can, when you look at like the poetry or whatever written by someone who's schizophrenic or suffering from severe psychosis, there's like a strange disjointed quality to it, and that a person with a kind of trained eye for that kind of thing, like a psychologist or psychiatrist, could probably recognize the kind of mental illness someone was suffering from by examining their art or their poetry or writing or whatever. That's not to discredit artists who happen to be mentally ill. Their art is still valid. I imagine that if you're someone who wrestles with mental illness, it's good. It's probably a healthy thing to have the outlet of art or creativity. And you're probably also offering the people on the other side of that, the people who experience your art, giving them a kind of window that maybe helps people understand what it's like to, go through or experience mental illness. Yeah, I knew something was bothering me about the title of that White Zombie song. Yeah, I just looked again. I think it's technically Supercharger Heaven, but people refer to it as Devil Man because of the chorus. Okay. But anyway, yeah, speaking of Devil Man, I mentioned how Go Nagai is known for kind of the, all the graphic violence and sex in his mangas or his comic books or strips, whatever. And I think the kind of prime example of that is Devilman. Yeah, so the Devilman series, I think is his name Akira. It features this, and Akira. I know Akira is like a legendary anime movie, but I think that like Akira is a common Japanese name or something. I think the main character's name is Akira, and this demonic power kind of awakens in him. I think it's the like the devil or demon Amon or something. He gains the power of a devil man. I think in the series, what he is referred to as a devil man because the thing that separates him from regular devils or demons is he still maintains his conscience or his humanity. Yeah, I know I'm really geeking out here. And for some reason, Go Nagai likes to kind of keep kind of revisiting his stories and coming up with new kind of iterations or versions of them. Just like there's a ton of different versions of the Mazinger story, where he kind of goes back and kind of reboots, his own story or whatever. And I think that's been done with Devilman too. There's different iterations of the Devilman story. And there's even a spin-off called Devil Lady. It's a very similar story, but with a female protagonist. And it doesn't translate very well, but I think it's sometimes referred to as Devil Lady Man. But, if you go, I think it's available for free with Amazon Prime. On Prime Video, I think you can watch a whole animated series called Devil Lady. And that's pretty intense, just like the original Devilman story. It's filled with sex and violence. And I think I read some of the comic for Devil Lady. And I think it's even, it's hard to believe, but it's even more graphic than the animated version that's geared towards adults. And it is kind of disturbing, but I think in the comic version, the female character gains her power, or her power awakens, while she's being, it's awful, raped, even though we're talking about fictional characters, being raped at the beginning of the story. I think she's either like a gym teacher or something like that, on a trip with students or something. And they're attacked by a bunch of humans who are kind of possessed by demons or devils. And I think one of them begins sexually assaulting her, and her kind of demonic power awakens as a reaction to the trauma, and she starts ripping apart all the other demons or whatever. But just absolutely crazy stuff. So just to, give some context. So yeah, I think the Devilman series, it either started, in like the 70s or the 80s. And they recently came out with like a reboot or a spinoff called Devilman Crybaby. It's about this really sensitive kid who gains the power of a devil man or whatever. And, it's filled with sex and violence. And I kind of like the modern spin on it. As someone who used to go to like kind of raves and that kind of thing in the 90s, it kind of has like a club feel to it. There's like people popping drugs and, dancing to like techno music and stuff. It's kind of very interesting take on it. And I feel like the animation style takes a little getting used to. I noticed this is fairly common with recent, like modern animation in general, that sometimes there'll be like a very relatively simplistic style, but sometimes it can have a kind of charm to it. And that's the case with Devilman Crybaby. The artistic style seems kind of like simple, even when compared to the older animes and stuff, but it grows on you, and it does have a kind of charm. And I kind of, even though I wasn't crazy about the animation at first, the style grew on me. But I thought if you're into watching anime and stuff like that, I thought it was really cool. And it's a pretty like intense story, and like the Devilman saga in general, throughout all the different iterations, it usually the story has a kind of a kind of dark, disturbing ending, and this was no exception. So yeah, Devilman Crybaby. And one more word before I move on. I know we're almost 2 hours in now, and I'm not finished with my list. It's weird. I have this reoccurring dream, or sometimes the dream can kind of mutate, or there's different versions of it, but the core theme is still the same. And I've had this I don't know, this has been going on for like, holy crap, probably like 20 years or something. And I know I used to talk about like another reoccurring dream motif I used to experience was, I had exorcist themed dreams or whatever. And I don't have those anymore because I think, like I said, the reason why I'm so fascinated by The Exorcist is because it absolutely terrified me as a child. And over time, I've learned to have this kind of, maybe my fear of the movie has kind of been replaced by a kind of affection and admiration for the movie or whatever. And so I think after like making my peace with The Exorcist, knock on wood, I know I'm a skeptic, I'm not supposed to do that, but I don't have exorcist nightmares anymore, because like I said, I don't really fear it anymore, but I still, I consider myself a fan. I'm kind of fascinated by the film. But anyway, yeah, so this other kind of reoccurring dream I have is that it's weird, like those die-cast metal super robot toys. I used to love those so much as a kid. And there are certain ones, because like I said, by the time I was old enough to be able to, appreciate and play with like die-cast metal action figures or whatever, they were like no longer selling them in regular stores anymore. You had to kind of hunt them down as collector's items and like get them from that place I mentioned on Moody Street in Waltham. And so some of the toys were kind of really hard to find. So some of my favorite characters, like my favorite super robot was always Grandizer, as he was called in the States, Grandizer in Japan. And I never got to have like an intact Grandizer toy as a kid. I think an older kid once gave me one as a gift, but it was like a little broken one that maybe had like one leg and all the paint was chipped off and it might have been missing like an arm or two or whatever. But I never had like a nice Grandizer figure as a kid. And so even today as an adult, I'll still have like a reoccurring dream that I'm a kid and I'm inside of like a department store, either in or looking for the toy aisle. And sometimes it's like the store is dark, like it's after hours or something, and it's closed. And I'll look and often I'll find a section where they have like robot toys, and I'll be looking around for like toys I never got to have as a kid, or maybe toys I did have as a kid, but stupidly, I sold them off when I first moved away from home or something so I could have, more money or whatever to pay bills or whatever. And usually in the dream, like I'll think I'm finding a toy I really, used to want as a kid, but then I'll discover that it's a cheap knockoff, or it's like a counterfeit one that doesn't quite look right, or, it's the brand is wrong or something like that. Really bizarre. So here I am like a grown-ass adult and I'll still have like that reoccurring dream. And I often wonder, is it just like, kind of, there's no really deep meaning to it? Maybe it's just a surface level kind of dream, like like a dog dreaming about chasing its own tail or something like that. It's just, there's no real deep symbolic meaning to it. It's just some kind of glitchy thing left over from my childhood and my desire for those toys when I was a kid. Or I wonder if there is like and I have kind of a complicated view on dreams because, I'm a skeptic, a non-believer, for short, just for the sake of brevity or simplicity. I'll often refer to myself as an atheist, and it's pretty accurate. I'm technically an agnostic atheist, a knowledge claim versus a belief claim. Knowledge-wise, I believe we can't really know for certain whether or not there is a God. But belief-wise, due to the lack of evidence in the man-made nature of religion, I'm very doubtful about things like a higher power or an afterlife. So people might think that there's something kind of new agey or airy-fairy, about believing that dreams have some kind of symbolic purpose. But I think it's possible that just psychologically, dreams could have symbolic value. No, that wasn't your phone. It was mine. I'm getting really sick of notifications. I thought I'd turn the ringer off or whatever, the sound off. Anyway, I was on a roll there too. But yeah, I think dreams probably have a couple of different functions. You know what I mean? I think on one level, it might just be, and I don't know if I'll be able to articulate this properly, but I think to put it roughly, there's a theory that dreams are just kind of mental detritus. It's our brain trying to organize and resolve, the events of the day or whatever. But at the same time, I think dreams probably do reflect our inner conflicts, our desires, you know what I mean? And so I think you probably can learn something about yourself from your own dreams, and that you can probably gain some kind of self-knowledge or achieve some kind of catharsis by, maybe keeping a dream journal and trying to review your dream and figure out what it might be telling you, you know what I mean? So like I was saying just, a minute ago, maybe that dream could really not have any deep meaning. It could just be simply what seems on the surface level. It just reflects my childhood, my unmet childhood desire for, these toys that I really wanted but couldn't have. Or maybe there is a deeper meaning and it's kind of symbolic of some kind of inner conflict, maybe a need to kind of examine and put behind, my childhood or something, or maybe it reflects some kind of some other kind of unmet desire or something, a longing I have for some kind of of completing some kind of life goal that I haven't completed yet. I don't know. And did I say detritus a moment ago? It's supposed to be detritus. There I go again. I'm always trying to cover my bases and make corrections in the present so I don't have to make them in the following episode. And so now I guess I'll move on to another show that I watched during this lockdown. It was actually the fourth season specifically of a show called The Last Kingdom. And I've watched the previous 3 seasons too. And it's kind of, I was about to call it a period drama, but I don't know if that's appropriate. Period meaning, a certain period in time. Maybe I should call it a historical drama to be more accurate. Plus, period drama makes me self-conscious, like I'm almost, like it has something to do with menstruation. Forget I said that. And anyway, yeah, so I think like many historical dramas, historical accuracy kind of takes a backseat to entertainment. You know what I mean? And I remember when I was younger, historical, a lack of historical accuracy in a movie or a TV series really bothered me. I was kind of a stickler about it. And to me, it was kind of like a matter of principle. I thought that people deserve to know the real history. And if you can tell an entertaining story while still being historically accurate, why not do that? I almost found sacrificing historical accuracy for the sake of a story almost deceptive in some way. But I think as I've gotten older, I've just kind of maybe I'm jaded or tired, maybe I just don't care anymore. But I'm not as much of a stickler for historical accuracy. but I will often, double check kind of, claims or depictions that I find in a historical drama to see how they stack up against the actual history. And whenever I think of, a lack of historical accuracy in, storytelling or whatever, or cinema, TV shows, whatever, I always think of Braveheart for some reason. Like a lot of people, I absolutely loved that movie. You know what I mean? It was very moving. It was just really compelling. But, I always laugh when I think about how I think in Braveheart, the battle of or at Sterling Bridge actually lacks the bridge in the movie. And I think that came down to something like a financial decision. Like it would have been a very costly scene or something like that. And there was other things like Mel Gibson's crazy Mad Max hair, and that, wasn't true to the period. And also, the Scottish warriors, they were depicted as wearing kind of like Celtic woad, that kind of blue paint. And I think that wasn't in keeping with the period. And I also think the kilts that were worn in the movie weren't in keeping with that specific period either. I could be wrong on that one, but I remember there was a number of things that kind of clashed with history in that movie. And still, at the end of the day, a really great movie, a really moving, score or whatever. Yeah, and so I think that The Last Kingdom is no exception, and it's based on a series of books, if I'm not mistaken. And so when it comes to historical dramas lacking historical accuracy, The Last Kingdom is no exception. And so just in short, it tells the story of an Anglo-Saxon nobleman, Uhtred, son of Uhtred, who is stolen from his home by Vikings, as a child. And then he's raised as a Dane. So he's kind of like a person with a foot in two worlds. He talks like a Dane. He kind of has like the spirit of a Dane. His beloved, kind of adopted, I guess. He was kidnapped. Father and brother, are Danes. And yet he's driven by the dream of, reclaiming or capturing his ancestral home. And he often, finds himself pitted against his quote unquote fellow Danes and ends up kind of grudgingly helping, Anglo-Saxons. And so he's depicted as having this complicated relationship with the historical King Alfred. And there's one of the historical inaccuracies right there. I guess there really was a character called Uhtred the Bold, but he didn't exist until about 100 years after the time of King Alfred. And Alfred dreams of achieving a united or creating a united England. And so, but there's kind of like this kind of grudging respect and this kind of animosity between Uhtred and Alfred. But often Uhtred finds himself helping, Alfred out. And so all in all, I think it's a pretty good show. It's good enough that I watched 4 seasons. And the main character, Uhtred, is portrayed by actor, I think is it Alexander Dreiman. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. And yeah, that guy's really charismatic. And he actually kind of reminds me of a young Brendan Fraser. Or was it Brandon Fraser? You know who I mean, the guy from The Mummy. But yeah, and I've heard this show compared to both Game of Thrones and Vikings. Vikings I can see. It kind of has a similar feel to Vikings. And Vikings is probably one of my favorite TV shows. And they definitely play fast and loose with historical accuracy in that one. But once again, what you gotta do, end of the day, it's still an entertaining show. And I think there probably is some wiggle room to take liberties with the story, with Vikings, because much of the history, is coming from the Norse sagas anyway. And I'm not sure how historically accurate the sagas themselves are. But still, there's some weird things with Vikings. Like, I think according to, history, the Rollo and Ragnar aren't even brothers, and a big part of the TV show Vikings is the kind of the tense relationship between those two brothers. And there actually was a Norseman named Rollo who became a Frankian, modern day France nobleman, but he wasn't a brother of Ragnar from the sagas. And if I remember correctly, I think Rollo specifically became the first ruler of Normandy. Normandy named for Norsemen, or whatever the word at the time for Norsemen was. So I definitely see the comparison to Vikings. They're both kind of like historical dramas. Probably don't have giant budgets, but they're still, really good, compelling shows. And, relatively speaking, I'm sure they still pour a lot of money into those things, you know what I mean? But I don't know if it was necessarily like Game of Thrones money. But, I think another thing that Vikings and The Last Kingdom have in common is there's not a lot of supernatural stuff. There's plenty of supernatural stuff in Game of Thrones, obviously, and Game of Thrones takes place in a completely kind of fictional world or whatever. Where Vikings had maybe a hint of supernatural stuff because they had, kind of religious visions, and there was, that prophet, that blind seer kind of figure, and things like that. But yeah, all in all, I think The Last Kingdom is a good show. It might not be like the best show I've ever seen, but still a good show worth watching, worth binge watching. And like I said, I probably like Vikings is one of my all-time favorite TV shows, but at the same time I understand why I'm watching it. It probably isn't running on like the biggest budget you've ever seen or anything like that. You know what I mean? You're watching a made-for-TV series, but still a really good series. And I'm kind of fascinated by history, both ancient history and, medieval history, the Viking Age, stuff like that. And I've always been kind of fascinated by Norse mythology and Viking culture. So, for all those reasons, and it's an entertaining show. Okay, almost there. One more thing on the list. And this one might actually surprise you. Because I'm always talking about how, not always, but, I've mentioned in the past that I'm not really, I love music. I'm a music junkie. And yet, not crazy about musicals or plays or whatever, what I mean? And yet I did do that episode where I kind of, gushed over Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar. And, I'm a non-believer, so that's doubly weird. But I ended up watching the movie adaptation of the musical, what is it called? The Greatest Showman. And because I made the list here in my notes, and autocorrect changed it to The Greatest Snowman. Okay. Yeah. What are you going to do? And so The Greatest Showman, starring Hugh Jackman. And how I came to watch this movie is that, I watch all sorts of atheist content creators on YouTube and non-atheist content creators as well. And I happened to be watching Cult of Dusty. And Cult of Dusty, a few streams in a row, he started his show off with this song. And I'm like, what the hell is that? It's kind of catchy, but what is it, And it's funny, someone in the comments section or whatever said, is that song you're playing Christian rock or something like that? And I could actually I can actually see why they were asking that because the song sounded like almost like it could be Christian rock, like it was kind of uplifting. It almost seemed like it had some kind of spiritual message or something like that. And then Dusty explained that no, it's not Christian rock. It's the song "The Greatest Show" from a Hugh Jackman musical called called "The Greatest Showman." I'm like, that's interesting. And yeah, and I do think it's really. I'm glad it's not Christian rock because I always say I like religious music in the sense that I like the religious music of the Middle Ages, like polyphony, Gregorian chant, stuff like that. And maybe I'm like a music snob in a sense, but I think Christian rock is a fucking abomination. You know what I mean? And here I am liking a song that someone might, rightfully mistaken for Christian rock or whatever. Yeah, because the lyrics, it's some of the lyrics are like, it's all you ever want, it's all you ever need, and it's right here, in front of you or something like that. And it's called The Greatest Show. So I almost thought, yeah, it had some kind of like existential or spiritual message about, the kind of awe of being alive or existence or something, but I think I was just reading too deeply into it because it's really a song about P.T. Barnum, about his, his circus or his American Museum of Curiosities or whatever. So here I am trying to attribute this deep spiritual message to this song, and it's really about 19th century showman P.T. Barnum or whatever, who I think I mentioned recently on the show when talking about the vegetable lamb of Tartary and the Fiji mermaid. And I think I actually butchered the lyrics. I just Googled it. The lyrics I was referring to actually go, it's everything you ever want, it's everything you ever need, and it's here right in front of you. This is where you want to be. Yeah, I thought it was like this like deep philosophical or spiritual kind of message about reveling in the present or, in existence. Anyway, yeah, so I think the movie came out in 2017, and I have a vague memory of maybe seeing advertisements for it online or something like that and just skipping over it, maybe because I knew it was a musical or thought it wouldn't be something I was interested in. Yeah, so really weird premise, man. And I'll say I actually ended up watching the movie and liking it. But yeah, a really strange premise. It's a musical about the life of P.T. Barnum. And in a way, I think that's kind of genius because I think by taking a topic like P.T. Barnum, it's going to have wide appeal. Because, people of all ages are aware of who P.T. Barnum is. But there are two things about it that I found really weird. One is that as I think is often done in Hollywood, they'll tell the story of, a real person, but they'll make the person, at least physically, more kind of idealized, more attractive or whatever, you know what I mean? And this to me is like the ultimate example of that. They took someone like P.T. Barnum. If you've ever seen images of P.T. Barnum, I guess you still kind of make fun of his own appearance. Kind of known for his large bulbous nose, his big pot belly, not being the most handsome of men. And who did they get to play P.T. Barnum? Hugh Jackman. So they took this guy who, I think, probably makes probably people of both sexes swoon, depending on what your personal, preferences or whatever. But this guy who's known for being in great physical shape, for being, really handsome, for being a great kind of leading man type of guy, probably, considered one of the best looking guys in Hollywood or something like that. And they get him to play P.T. Barnum. So it's kind of weird because you're looking and you're like, this guy looks absolutely nothing like P.T. Barnum. He's still jacked, probably from doing the X-Men movies, so it looks like he has like no body fat. And, in stark contrast to P.T. Barnum's kind of ugly mug, he's got Hugh Jackman's face. But if you just try to engage your suspension of disbelief and just sit back and give yourself over to, the movie or musical or whatever, I actually think it's actually a pretty enjoyable ride. And there was a number of songs I actually found myself liking in it. And I guess from what I read, the soundtrack did really well and was kind of at the top of the Billboard charts or whatever. And yet the movie itself, if I'm not mistaken, well, I don't know how it did at the box office. It may have performed well in that sense. But as far as how it was received by both critics and moviegoers, I think I guess it was received rather poorly. And to be honest, I'm not sure how the whole Rotten Tomatoes scoring system works, but I'm just looking here and it says that it has an approval rating of only 56%. And yet, despite that, I myself actually, and I'm someone who doesn't really go in for musicals, I actually really liked it. I thought it was kind of enjoyable and uplifting. Like I already said, I enjoyed some of the music. And one thing that I really noticed was that both Hugh Jackman, as well as some of the other actors, singers, performers, or whatever, seemed to really be into what they were doing and really enjoyed doing what they were doing. And you could see and hear the enthusiasm in their performances. And there was something really kind of infectious or moving or, inspiring about that. And I really enjoyed it. But I mentioned I found a couple of things kind of strange, about the idea of a musical based on the life of P.T. Barnum, aside from the casting, that P.T. Barnum is a very kind of controversial figure. And he has kind of, a mixed legacy. I mean, yeah, on the one hand, he was a great showman. He provided people with a great deal of entertainment and really knew how to put on a show or offer a spectacle, you know what I mean? But he was also what we would call a con man, too, you know what I mean? And I'm not sure what was in his head, what his personal psychology or view of it was. I mean, maybe he expected that people knew what his claims were so outlandish they couldn't be true, but people still, kind of willfully employed a suspension of disbelief for the sake of, their own entertainment or whatever. Or maybe he did think he was kind of pulling the wool over their eyes. I don't know. But yeah, he drew eyeballs and put, pardon my language, asses in seats by making these sensational, overinflated claims, you know what I mean? Or creating, wild backstories for so-called, human oddities, or trying to pass off hoaxes like the Fiji mermaid as being real. Or when, as I discussed in the vegetable lamb episode, it was really the torso, the upper half of a dead juvenile monkey sewn to the back half of a fish, or, that kind of stuff. And a really good example of this, and this is actually kind of, a really kind of dark and disturbing story, is that when he was 25, he supposedly, quote unquote, bought an elderly black woman. I guess slavery was already illegal in New York. I think P.T. Barnum was born in Connecticut, but his American Museum, etc., was based in New York. And I think this is kind of how he started out in quote unquote show business. Sorry for all the quote unquotes. And I guess this elderly black woman, an acquaintance of Barnum's, was already trying to pass her off as having been like 161 years old, and that, claiming she had been the nurse of George Washington and all this stuff. And Barnum, once again, quote unquote, sorry, bought her using a loophole that even though slavery was illegal, he was still allowed to kind of lease her and, then eventually pay, complete the sale or whatever. And so this poor old woman who I think was basically blind, almost completely paralyzed. And so, yeah, he tried to pass her off as being, 161 years old or whatever. And at the time of her autopsy, she was deemed to be no more than 80 years old. And it's funny, once upon a time, the circus was considered or looked at to be this completely kind of wholesome, kind of entertainment for the whole family or whatever. And a big component of P.T. Barnum, Barnum and Bailey Circus was, of course, the inclusion of exotic animals, big cats, and of course, most famously elephants. And but I think the view of the circus has rightfully so been changing, within recent history as we learn just the kind of miserable conditions the animals, exist in or whatever. Elephants in particular are, of course, highly intelligent, emotional, social animals. And to take these giant, animals that are used to being, on the plains in Africa with room to roam and socialize and live the way they're meant to. And so, to take them, put them in confinement, beat them and abuse them into performing, tricks for our entertainment. It's just really disturbing, vile stuff. And sorry to bring this stuff up again, but in one of those those really kind of disturbing documentaries I watched about factory farming and cruelty to animals, etc., there was like a brief segment on the circus. They had this secretly recorded footage that was showing, and I think this is a guy who had been fairly well known as an animal trainer and who tried to pass himself off as being, ethical and never abusing the animals or whatever. But they had this kind of behind the scenes footage of the guy instructing other workers how to treat the animals and how to get them to do what you needed them to do, right? And so they use these things called bull hooks, and I think they actually may have been used in P.T. Barnum's time too. Literally these like big metal hooks. Of course, elephants have really thick skin and they're giant animals. So if you're going to try to hit them to get them to do something, you're going to need something that can really get their attention, So these big kind of like hook-like instruments. And he was telling the guys how you just really haul back and let them have it. And he's demonstrating. He just slams the bull hook into like the elephant's leg, and the thing cries out in like pain or whatever. And it was really just obscene and kind of heartbreaking to watch. They're trying to get this circle of elephants to move, in a circle, holding each other's tails. We've probably all seen that where one elephant takes its trunk and holds on to the next elephant's tail, and they form like a kind of a chain or whatever, or a line or circle, and move around for our, viewing entertainment or whatever, our viewing pleasure. And they were showing, this footage revealed how much like abuse and coercion it takes to train these beasts to do those kind of what seem to be these simple little entertaining tricks or whatever. And they're showing also how, almost like prisoners of war or something, they experience all this kind of trauma and stress from being in captivity. And they'll resort to kind of like swaying their heads back and forth in this very unnatural way. We've probably seen elephants do that, circus elephants do that, and think it was something they were either trained to do or it's part of their natural behavior. And I think other wild animals exhibit this kind of behavior in captivity too, this kind of obsessive, almost compulsive head weaving. It's like something they desperately resort to try to deal with the stress and madness of being a wild animal stuck in, like, cramped confinement or whatever. So it was just awful. The guy's like swearing at the animals, absolutely no respect for them as living creatures, abusing them with the bull hooks and shit. So fuck the circus. I think it's right to bring that shit down and bring it to an end. You can have human performers if you want. At least with that, there's consent. But I was, all that being said, I was reading an article about P.T. Barnum recently, and it was about this very interesting relationship he had with an animal rights advocate. And there was I don't know if this was like a habit or something he had where he formed these kind of grudging, friendships with people who were critical of him or something. In the movie, or based on the musical, The Greatest Showman, there's a similar relationship. I don't know if it's real or if it's something they made up for the movie, or if this reporter or critic is kind of like a composite character. But there's this. I guess he's kind of like he's some kind of literary guy who critiques things for a newspaper or whatever, and he's very critical of P.T. Barnum. And this guy only has really, small moments throughout the film, but they still, show this interesting kind of story arc or whatever, where as the movie progresses, the two men seem to form a kind of almost like this little adversarial friendship, or they develop this grudging respect for one another. And in real life, there was, like I was saying, there's a relationship like that P.T. Barnum had with an animal rights advocate. And as time went on, I guess near the end, I think P.T. Barnum started out as a politician, or at some point he was also became a politician. And later on in life, he actually became more outspoken about things like animal rights issues and racial issues, etc. And so I guess, not guess, I would say definitely, it's a good thing. If you have someone who was, willing to buy a woman like she was, some kind of commodity or product for his own use, and someone who was keeping wild animals captive for, other people's entertainment and, for his own, to fill his own coffers or whatever. I think it's better that the guy sees the light at some point. I mean, the worst case scenario would be he stays an asshole his whole life. It's better for him to used to be an asshole and then come around later on in life. So, I mean, kudos to him for that. So there was that kind of almost like redemptive arc for him. And I actually found that article I'd been reading. It's actually from The Atlantic, and it's dated 2017. But it's entitled How P.T. Barnum Helped the Early Days of Animal Rights. The circus founder played a small, peculiar role in the nascent activist movement, one that would later cheer the end of the quote-unquote greatest show on earth. Yeah, and it actually talks about how, ironically, in his later years, P.T. Barnum kind of became the type of guy who probably would have cheered the end of, his own circus, at least in its decision to stop exploiting animals. And so, the name of that guy, that animal rights activist, is Henry Bergh, I think it's pronounced, Bergh. It says, through his unlikely friendship with the prominent early animal rights activist, Henry Bergh in the late 1800s, Barnum found himself in the thick of the debate over the care and feeding of Victorian animal entertainers. In fact, the animal rights movement might not have survived to exist in its modern form and breadth if not for the media exposure Barnum lent in its fragile infancy. Berg, the previously idle son of a wealthy New York shipping family, founded the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, the ASPCA, in 1866. Catalyzed by raucous bullfights and the ill treatment of carriage horses he witnessed as he traveled through Europe, Berg traded early retirement for a life of activism. He was easily recognizable as he strode around Manhattan, looking to intervene in instances of animal abuse. If you were walking a city street in the 1860s and happened to see a tall, lanky gentleman with a giant drooping mustache standing in the intersection and hollering at overloaded streetcars to pull over, that was Henry Berg. Yeah, and so it goes on to detail how the two men kind of publicly feuded via the papers, etc. And so, yeah, Barnum, because of his own notoriety, his popularity, actually helped Berg gain popularity, you know? And Barnum would actually point out areas where he agreed with Berg, and where he was sympathetic to his message, but he would kind of try to gently scold Berg by trying a different approach, and implying that he had kind of an unappealing delivery or whatever. And I'm paraphrasing, but in essence, that you catch more flies with honey or whatever, And this article ends, it says, in his later years, it was clear Berg had taken his media training to heart. In a typically plain-spoken letter to Barnum, he asked, "Will your estate provide for the animals whose labor has made your fame and fortune?" Barnum obliged, writing sizable donations to humane organizations into his will, and for good measure, he added a bequest to the city of Bridgeport to erect a statue of Berg. A monument in Berg's honor, topped with a prancing horse, was placed in Bridgeport's Seaside Park in 1897 and stands today. So that's kind of a nice ending to that story, I think. And speaking of endings, we finally reached the end of this episode. So, as always, thanks guys for listening. I really appreciate it. You guys know the drill. You can like the Facebook page. You can follow the show on Twitter. You can check out the YouTube channel. Maybe you're doing that now. If you want to support the show, help support the show monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/theweekindoubt and help what I do here for as little as 99 cents a month. All right, brothers and sisters, until next time.